So hi everyone, good morning. Thank you for joining us today at our QuestionPro webinar. We here in San Mateo are super excited to have you all guys, and while still people are joining us, let me start off by introducing you to our panelists today. So today, first of all, we have Eric Boduch, who is the founder and VP of marketing at Pendo.io. Pendo.io is a venture-backed software company that recently raised 11 million, which is a great achievement. Congrats, Eric. Eric has been
Thank
involved.
you.
Eric has been involved in both startups and publicly traded software companies, and has been in senior management positions since 1995. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
Yes, and on the other side we have here Anup Surendran. Anup is the VP of Product and Engineering here at QuestionPro. He has provided solutions to many of the Fortune 500 companies in financial and retail space. Most recently, he has been rolling out impressive large-scale customer loyalty programs before joining QuestionPro. Hi, Anup, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Santa. Thanks for inviting both myself and Eric to this webinar. And before I get going, is there anything else you want to add, Santa?
No, I just want to say Anup is actually the author of this 7-step framework that we'll be discussing today. So yeah, I just wanted to say, Anup,
Okay.
take it from here, and let's learn something new.
Okay, thank you again, Santa. So before I start get going here, I want to start off with a theme. And just before I go ahead, can everybody actually see the screen here? Just make sure, Santa, that we don't have people who have problems seeing that screen. Okay, we do not have any problems. That's what I'm hearing. Good. So the theme which I want to talk about reflects a basic human nature. And this applies to employees and it also applies to your customers. People want to be heard and to contribute. So moving on, the whole agenda for today is a customer-centric agenda. And based on the theme, we have 7 areas of a framework, which I would like to highlight along with Eric. Starting off with observation of your customers, finding the customer's purpose, which will translate into purpose-built products, transparent processes and communication, ideation with your customers, understanding motivations and finding behaviors which you want customers to continue doing, and behaviors which you want to modify or change. And the last 2 pieces are which we want to talk about is keeping your team members accountable for a customer-centric approach, and most importantly, turning products from merely functional into lovable products. So the starting framework piece here is observation. I'm just going to pause a bit and moving on to the next slide, Santa. Thank you. So, in business, there's this thing, and everybody knows it, and it's called money. So there's this natural inclination to talk about money when you start making a product. So questions like, how much is it going to take to make a product, and how much money are we going to make from the product? These are the questions your CEO is going to ask, your VP of products going to ask, the guys who invest money into your product company, they're going to ask all these questions. Well, the real question everybody should be asking is, are we solving some pain? And if I take and flip that coin and ask this question on the other side of the equation, if we did solve a pain, is using the product which you just made, is that using the product a pain? And this all starts with observation. So observation, there are many ways to observe a customer as they go through their workflow in multiple settings, which, by the way, gives you a lot of insights which your product doesn't capture. And there are multiple ways to observe, like I just mentioned. But let me start off with the story. Most recently, I was watching a new user who was just using our survey tool. We are in the business of creating surveys. QuestionPro is the leading provider of survey software. And when I saw this user using the survey tool, I found that the process of adding a question to the survey was extremely slow. And I could visibly see this user thinking. And I had to ask and prod this user and say, why did he just, why did he stop there in terms of adding a question? And he said, the default question or the default text in that question was, how often do you send surveys? Which kind of confused him. Instead, if we were smart enough, we would have just put in the default question as default question text, and it would have been less confusing. But small things like that, just observing a customer just using a product or just going through his normal workflow, makes a big difference in streamlining your product, your user interface, and the user experience. And this is what we typically call active observation. The other side of the spectrum is when you capture data and analyze the data based on customers' past behaviors. The real point here, when you do observation, is to do early and continuous validation. Talking about, kind of passive observation, I'll pass this on to Eric right now, who will talk about the qualitative aspects. Go ahead, Eric.
Thanks, Anup. So first, let me say I'm a software guy. So the stories and perspectives that I'll be giving today is from the lens of digital/software products. I think a lot of the things I say are applicable to non-software products where data can be captured, but it might be a little more difficult to capture that data. So with that being said, let me talk a little bit about observation. So we've all heard about the data explosion. The amount of data in the digital world, I heard, is doubling every 2 years. And I heard from an analyst the other day that they predict that 10 to 15 trillion, that's a huge number, can be added to the global GDP by analyzing and looking for creating efficiencies from all this data. So, net, everyone should be observing how people use their products. The way I look at it today, most companies and people understand inherently the importance of capturing qualitative data. They could probably use some good tools to do more of it, but they understand inherently the importance of capturing that qualitative data. But many companies today, however, I think have neglected some of the quantitative data capture. And in today's day and age, there's no reason not to capture as much data as possible. So here's an interesting story. One company we know, a year or two back, they had changed how to accomplish a particular task in their product. Now, this wasn't a big change, just some graphical elements, some button changes, some repositioning of certain items. But as it turns out, the usage of that portion of the application dropped 30%. However, the usage patterns of the application weren't being captured, so they didn't actually know this for a while. They only figured it out 3 months later when they were speaking with customers, and the customers asked them, well, why did you remove that feature? Which, of course they hadn't. And then they went back and did some customer, studies and estimated the impact and found out about that 30% decreased usage. So just one example of, always be observing, both qualitatively and quantitatively. The second aspect to, observation is a little bit of today's day and age. We live in an always-on day. Today's day and age products are always being used. They're always on. By capturing everything users do, you have data to make future decisions or to solve problems you didn't know you were going to have. So one of my suggestions is try to capture all the data you can, even if you're not actively tracking or reporting on that data. I like to say no one always knows what they need to know. Or, more commonly said, hindsight is 20/20. So here's a good example of what I mean by that. So we have a client who had an outage one time. A portion of his web-based application just wasn't working for a pretty significant period of time. It wasn't data he was actively tracking, but it was data that was being captured by our platform. So he was about to send an email out to his whole customer base, apologizing for the outage and offering amends. But he called us first, and we reminded him that the data, even if he wasn't actively tracking it or reporting on it, he had it. So he was then able to figure out that only 20% of his customers used that affected portion of his application during the outage period. So let's just say it made the apologies and amends a lot easier. The next thing to think about is purpose. So, it's really important to build your product with purpose. And I think you can use the data we talked about to help you accomplish that purpose. Look at slicing and dicing your data. Look at different segments of your data. Think about it. Do successful customers use your product in different ways than, say, unsuccessful customers? Does the first few weeks of using your product set the tone for whether a customer will eventually be successful or not? Think about how to use this data to improve customer onboarding and this early customer experience. You should also, spend time looking at how your users accomplish tasks. Do they follow the path through the application that you've envisioned? Do they progress through pages and features like you expect? We had a great example of a client who segmented his customers based upon the success of their trial program. And he was a software provider and ran free trials. He looked at his data and found that successful trials used certain features that unsuccessful trials did not. So then he said, well, how can I affect this? He then used our software to target in-application guides and messages to trial users, halfway through the trial. But he only targeted them if and only if they haven't tried these important features. So in essence, these guides, these messages, step the trial users through how to use the important features. So how well did this work? Well, by doing this, he increased his trial conversion rate 57%. So a really significant number. And it's all just about looking at your data, analyzing it, gaining insights from it, and then applying it through to this constant purpose-built improvements of your product. And in another example, we had a client who used this data to see exactly where customers dropped off when they were trying to complete a series of actions. And then he changed his user interface and tested again. And he did this again. And he kept doing this until his completion percentage improved to where he wanted it to be. So this is kind of that iterative process. Understand your data, gain insights from it, use that data to make changes to your process, and then keep iterating on it, until you reach that, quote unquote, perfect state.
Hey, Eric, so I had a question around, purpose built and you creating segments. What's your best practice around, creating customer segments, especially when you think of it from a product management or product marketing standpoint? What do you suggest?
So, as far as creating segments, I think, you want to create segments in a way to gain insight. In the example I mentioned, a customer was looking at things to say, okay, what's the difference between my successful versus my unsuccessful trials? We'll often put cohorts in our own product where we'll look at, okay, what's the initial customer experience? What are they doing in the first couple of weeks of of using our product? So we'll take that time box. We also will set up segments to see how, customers, they might have different versions of the product or use it differently. And that can help us with things like pricing. We'll look at different aspects of our product, different areas of functionality, and see how different customers, say, from different industries might use different areas. So, there's lots of power in doing strong segmentation, lots of different things you can do, and encourage people to have the data to do a lot of experimenting with it.
Got it. Thanks. So I guess I'll take it on from here, Eric. The next piece in our framework goes back to a thing which I'm very fond of, and it's a cultural thing and a key part of a project management practice. So it's not really product management, but it's really a much broader in terms of practice. The message here really is that customers want to know what's going on with the things which matter to them. So, for example, if you commit to something to a customer and the customers expect you to follow up with them, you better follow up. The worst thing which you can do is wait for the customer to follow up with you after something is overdue. That just breaks the trust factor. And you want customers to trust you with, the product, the experience, the processes which surround the product. If you change priorities of your task, because priorities always change, and everybody's priorities change based on their objectives, personal objectives, and the team's objectives. And it's important that you let your customer know. So going back to the slide here, if you don't commit to something, let them know why you didn't commit to that. Because like I said, priorities could change, or it does not meet your internal objectives, and there's a path which your company wants to take. It's key that you explain the intent And explaining intent is explaining product intent, explaining business intent. So want to move on?
Also, let me just jump there in right quick because I think there's something that relates to that a bit. We have a question from Michael, and he's asking, so how for new products who don't have any customers, how do you collect data there? Maybe Anup, you.
Yeah, so let's see if Eric has something. I do have a couple of points I can add. Eric, do you? So he's talking about new products and how do you collect with no customers.
Yeah, do you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
Go ahead first, Eric.
So my advice to you would be to find, users, even if they're not yet customers, and put them in front of your product, see how they use it. You can collect the data there, of how they're using it. You can use that going forward. You can compare it. And then I would also take that opportunity to do more qualitative, talk them through it, walk them through it, put up some surveys and polls to ask them, about their experiences. So I would do that twofold, start capturing that quantitative data just by, putting potential users in front of it, even if they aren't yet customers, and see what their experience is like, if that's at all possible. And then also use kind of the survey, the question and answer, the polling methods too.
Yeah, I kind of agree with both the approaches, Eric. We get a lot of inbound requests with new product features or capabilities. What we do is we do the easy way here internally, so that the product team can quickly deliver gather feedback. Is we do decks, slides, Google Slides. We do InVision app for mocking up screens, and which gets closer to the product in terms of look and feel, and they can click through it and see if the user flow actually matches to their expectation. The outbound approach is kind of sending out surveys and saying, okay, these products will have these features. Do you think this is going to drive some value in your business, right? So those are two, kind of same thing which you just said, Eric, and same thing we apply here. So going to the next slide here, ideate and ideation. So ideation is something which automatically happens in your company. If you're transparent with your customers, they will be transparent with what they're going through. And some of these could potentially be ideas which you could implement. So even if you don't focus on ideation, whether you like it or not, innovation happens in some form or fashion. The simplest form of innovation is when we see customers doing workarounds. You see that happening all the time. That is when something doesn't work, they hack products to get to a result in a different path. And what I truly believe is to innovate at exponential rates, you have to do it with your customers. We have to keep track of speed and relevance of these ideas. That's a separate story. But we also have to ensure that there is minimal waste of effort, both ways, right? In terms of customers writing up a big idea and you taking it and taking this and implementing it within your product or your processes.
Right, and adding to that, Michael is who asked the previous question is asking if they would need to use panel groups maybe to collect this data.
Absolutely, Michael, great suggestion. That's something I was going to talk about in ideation too. So you get a lot of feedback if you have community set up. So whether the community is an open community like Facebook or your company's panel management piece of software or a community software, you can actually ask, what do you like about these products? What do you don't like about these products? And what would you like to see in the products? A lot of our customers, including customers in our gaming industry, actually fine-tune their products almost on a weekly basis because they can do that in terms of engineering based on feedback they receive from their VIP customers, so the customers who have used their products very frequently in the last a month or last 3 weeks. They can solicit feedback and put that back into products. It's a great point there, Michael, and thanks for bringing that up. And so ideation through communities is a great idea. And there are a lot of ideas which come from the same segment of customers. So whether I call it the VIP customers, you can communicate these ideas back and have a conversation with that segment of customers. It's important that you keep the selection process transparent using processes which you are familiar with or which are actually good in this space. For example, we at QuestionPro use MaxDiff specifically to see, to say, go back to our customers and say, hey, you've given us these 15 ideas, but the top ideas are these based on the MaxDiff analysis we ran. So it typically works when we send it to a customer segment, and it helps us to focus on those top three ideas which needs to be implemented for that quarter, for example. I'm just pausing here. I see some questions coming up. Any questions at this point?
Yeah. Also, there's a question that somebody raised asking about going back a bit more to segmentation. So maybe that's a question actually for Eric. Since every segment has kind of no, sorry. Let's maybe take a different question now, since we're talking about MaxDiff analysis. A question just came in asking, what does a typical MaxDiff question look like?
Right. Thanks, Sandra. Good question again. Yes, I'm just showing you or sharing with the team and the audience here the MaxDiff analysis report. But MaxDiff is an approach for obtaining preference or importance scores for multiple items. It's a very simple question type, which is actually supported in QuestionPro, where people vote for different line items and can truly differentiate between what's most important versus what's least important. And it's much better than using a scale of 0 to 5, because when you do that, there's no clean differentiator as what's most important versus what's least important. It's an advanced question type which I am very fond of using, and I highly recommend any product management team to continuously use it, especially when you have a segment of customers who are coming up with features which you want to truly loop back and have a conversation with. Cool. So I guess we go to the next slide here if there's no other questions. So this is an interesting and very important slide for me personally. This chart you see here comes from BJ Fogg's behavior model, and yes, it's not an easily readable chart, but basically what it says is that behavior is a function of motivation, ability, and trigger. And this chart is applied in products, in marketing, in sales. It doesn't really matter, but I'm a big fan of this chart, and I give credit to Mr. BJ Foggs for this. But the job of a great product person is to start with a specified behavior and break it down into these three elements, which goes back to motivation, ability, and trigger. And what you have to figure out as a product person is what is blocking your user from using your product. So there are many factors which block people from using a product. Time, for example. You have more ability to perform a behavior that takes very little time versus one that takes a lot of time. Money. So if you have a feature which has a high barrier to entry from a pricing point, obviously you don't have usage. Physical effort, mental cycles, social deviance, and anything which is non-routine will have a problem in terms of people actually accepting a product feature or a product by itself. I'm going to pause here for a bit again, just to make sure there are no questions popping up.
I think we can actually continue going, and then we'll have some questions are coming in, but we can address them a bit later.
Perfect, Santa. Thanks for doing that. So the next piece here, again, goes back to a cultural thing. To be truly customer-centric, you need to take some sort of action to show the customer that you're actually listening to what they say. So let me start with the most recent incident which happened to us. So one of our customers emailed to the CEO straight, CCing a couple of us, about a security hole they found in the product, and the CEO didn't respond. Now, it's not because he didn't want to respond, it's just because he did not have the time and he was actually busy traveling. But the fact that there were others in the email thread who could have responded to that was more appropriate. And it's expected that one of us or one of the people who were CC'd on that email should have provided an ETA on how we're going to address and when we're going to address that security hole. And it's important that this accountability is an individual accountability and a team accountability. So I don't have to say this, but it's obvious, but I'll say this anyways. if you have a healthy, accountable, and happy team, it's going to portray positivity to your customers, and that's the kind of image any product company has to portray outward. Whether the product, whether the product shows that maturity, the team itself has to add on top of the maturity by portraying a positive, accountable mindset. If you want to call that a mindset, I think that's a mindset and it's a cultural thing. So the next slide here is something which Eric's going to take on. Eric, go ahead.
Thanks, Anup. Lovable. I love this slide because it really it focuses on keeping the users, well, you say it right on the slide, keeping the users at the heart of the product. I think, one thing we've done at Pendo is we try to think about everything from our users' shoes, the product managers, the user experience people really understand, where they're coming from. But looking at it from an overall perspective, let's talk about lovable. What makes a product truly wonderful? And in order to make a product great, you shouldn't just think about a product as a set of features and functions, but think about the whole user experience. How you onboard users at the beginning, how you educate users about how to become successful, how you inform users as your product changes. All of those things are part of the overall product experience. You really need to think about how to accomplish all of those things effectively. In a software world and in software today, we live in a world without manuals. You can use the product itself as a mechanism to teach users. And then you can adjust those teachings automatically. It can be adjusted based upon the type of customer, their experience with the product. So those teachings can change as a person, spends 6, 9, 12 months in your product. And it can change as new parts of the product itself change. So I think when you think about products as not just a collection of features and functions, but as the whole experience, you can create a truly lovable and awesome experience for your customers.
Awesome, thanks, Eric. I think one of the questions which always come up in terms of how do you measure this, and I get a couple. I have a couple of options which I'm kind of fond of using, at least at QuestionPro. One thing we do is we measure the happiness levels of our users, or the heart of a user, by running an NPS question. So do we have a screenshot yet? So that is something we do at QuestionPro. You see an example of a screenshot here where I got an email after a certain action which I completed successfully within the product, and then we use that to understand how happy that customer was in terms of usage of a product. And that's pretty much it. I think at this point in time we've kind of wrapped up this webinar, and I'm going to pass it on to Santa to see if we have additional questions popping up here, and I'll take it from there.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Anup. Right on time, like how we aimed. Yeah, we do have some questions that have come in, so we'll go a bit back. So we have a question from Anna, who is asking about building a product. Her question is more specific, asking, how do you know when is it worthwhile building a product with more features that would be less used, or perhaps it's better to use build a product with fewer features that are used more often?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question for Eric.
Yeah, Eric, do you? So Anna's wondering, is it?
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer that question. From my perspective, a lot of it depends upon, what your product is, what the industry is, what the competitive offerings are. So there are some variables that are hard to understand, without going into more detail. But where I would err on the side of less features that are more powerful. So really try to make a customer successful in solving very specific problems and do a really good job of that. So once you start there and you have kind of that entry point, and as long as those problems are important enough, I think you have a strong entry point. So concentrate on something, make sure you do it well, and then expand out from there would be the side I would err on, and thinking about building great products.
Yeah, I agree with that, Eric. I mean, the thing for everybody to notice is there's a shift in the landscape. When I say there's a shift, I'm talking about the product landscape. A lot more products are going online as software as a service. Now, when you go as software as a service, there is no direct what do you say? There's no implementation delay in terms of feature rollouts. So it's good for software as a service companies to roll out features quickly and iterate quickly and get this into wider audience. But that's not what users measure satisfaction at this point. But what people do measure is the whole overall experience in terms of support, the ease of use of a product, and the going back to what Eric's deck is the whole onboarding experience and the ongoing state of a user and making sure the product actually matches that change in state of a user or customer based on their life cycles. That's what is more important at this point. In the past, enterprise companies could roll out features and they could charge more. And every release, whether it's SAP or IBM, would say, hey, we have version 5.0 coming down, and hence you should pay us X dollars in terms of those additional features. Now, things have changed, like I pointed out. It's important that the overall satisfaction, overall experience of the user, whether it's that toll free number which they call in and say, "Hey, I have a problem here. My invoice hasn't gone through. How do you resolve that?" To finishing out a form on your website, finishing out a specific feature, a function within your product that matters more.
Right. Well addressed there. I just quickly wanted to answer Thomas' question. Thomas asked if he can get the presentation slide deck. Of course, this presentation will be uploaded on SlideShare within next 24 hours. Probably we'll do it today right after. There'll also be a video recording on YouTube, and there will be also a blog post on QuestionPro regarding this webinar. We'll send out also an email with all the links to the registrants and attendees. With the links to these sources. We have another question. I know that it's more relating to you. You talked about socially acceptable behavior when you were talking about the accountability slide. What I wanted to ask there is somebody's asking, that is, Martha is asking, social deviance. Could you maybe elaborate more on what is actually socially acceptable behavior and social deviance?
Yeah, great question again. Thanks, Mark, for asking that. So I guess it goes back to one of Eric's slides, and I'll pass it on to him if he has any questions. But when you build a product, and if it's not purpose built, you will land into problems where you cannot prioritize features. So so going back to your question on social deviance and socially acceptable. So on Twitter, if you take Twitter as an example, it's a great product where people post updates of intimate moments in their lives, right? And it's socially acceptable to actually post this on Twitter because Twitter is actually driving these trigger points by actually giving a stream of personal kind of posts, right? But if you go back to an enterprise software, it's kind of normally acceptable to share reporting data or private data within the boundaries of that organization, right? And it's not socially acceptable to take that reporting data if it's financially sensitive to share that on Twitter, right? And it's important that product teams understand these clear black or whites and what's acceptable in terms of the realm of creating these products, because you don't want you need to build in gates within the products to make sure if somebody does deviate away from that behavior, that the gates actually there within the product, and data cannot be lost because people just deviate away from the normal acceptable practice. Hopefully, I answered that, Santa. But
Yeah.
it's actually something we have to think through as product managers to ensure that the user doesn't have to worry about deviating away from normal behavior.
Right. Thanks. And we have a question from John. This question is a bit relating to what we already were responding towards the if you don't have any data or no customers, how would you then start measure? This is more asking if you have no access to customers, what is the best way or what would you suggest for ideation?
Ideation. Okay, I'll take that on, and Eric, I'll probably ask you to chip in. So ideation is, I look at it and say, understanding a market and understanding pains within that market or a specific role. When you do in day-to-day jobs, you probably find out that there's this problem which you would like to solve, and you might think you can probably build a product to solve that pain. The point is, once you think there's a pain, you just have to have kind of an approach where you go to similar people who might be experiencing that pain and have a conversation. Start off with a conversation with a peer, start off with somebody who you're comfortable with, and then take it back into the market. And it could be, like I said, a slide, a deck you take in and ask feedback on the deck, and start getting ideas around that pain. I mean, I'm focused on solving a problem, and the other type is ideation around the theme itself. So if there's a theme and you want to ideate, again, this is more of a market research kind of approach. You would start up a community, you would ask that question in the community, and people will come back with the answers there. Eric, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just, I spent some time as an advisor for the University of Pittsburgh in their tech transfer program, and they're looking at commercialization, and we're talking with, helping professors and giving advice about, how to turn technology into commercially viable enterprises. And I would say that, the most important thing is talking to potential users. So, I mean, you have to figure out a way to get your product, your idea, whatever you happen to have in front of potential users and potential customers. It's so to speak, every plan sounds great until it, meets external forces. So get your ideas in whatever format you have, out in front of potential users and see how they hold up.
Okay, thank you, Eric, for that. And now it looks like we've wrapped up all the questions that we had. Let me just say and thank again Eric for joining this webinar. Thank you, Anup, for wonderful insights and the 7-step framework. For our attendees, let me just remind you to follow our social media for more information. You can see the details for Twitter on the slide, for Pendo.io, and for QuestionPro. As I said, these slides will be available on SlideShare. The video recording will be available on YouTube, and you'll also be able to find a short recap on QuestionPro's blog. And we hope you join also our next webinars. Thank you again, Eric and Anup.
Thank you.